Hey, that's right. We're talking about Prince. So we're talking about Prince. Finally talking about Prince. That's right. For a very long time, I've been wanting to do a Prince video because Prince is one of my all-time favorite artists. Gonna drink a little Black Label. It's the afternoon. Done work for the day. It's time to have some fun. Talk about not just Prince, but one of his greatest albums, Sign of the Times. A lot of people say Sign of the Times. I myself even make this mistake from time to time. But it's not Sign of the Times, it's Sign O the Times. That's right, and it's a peace symbol, is the O. But you can't walk around saying sign, peace symbol of the times, because that's a goddamn mouthful, isn't it? And Sign O the Times doesn't really sound good either, so I'm probably just going to say Sign of the Times myself, even though I'm at least acknowledging that this is wrong, and I shouldn't do it, but I don't always do the right thing. So I am a flawed man. So Prince Sign of the Times, it's a masterpiece and one of his greatest albums. I assume you know this album if you're watching this video, because if you're watching a Prince Sign of the Times video, you have to have a cursory knowledge of Prince, I would think. Regardless, I'm going to break it down for you. The reason I decided to focus on this album, recently, a couple of weeks ago, I finally got that Sign of the Times Super Uber Deluxe set that not only has a remastered version of the album, but a whole bunch of other things, and the vault and all this stuff, and unreleased tracks, and a live album, and I'm going to get to all that. I'm going to review that whole deluxe edition. But first things first, I'm going to explain the very, exceedingly, extremely, really complex, complicated, convoluted history of Sign of the Times, because well, let's get into it. So in 1986, Prince is coming off of Parade, aka the soundtrack to Under the Cherry Moon, one of my favorite Prince albums. This would end up being the last release from Prince and the Revolution. Now, the Revolution, they were a real band. Prince was the leader. He was definitely the leader and dictator of the band and the primary creative force. But Wendy and Lisa did contribute. They contribute to the songwriting and vocals, even a lead vocal here and there. They did on a track, I Wonder You, on Parade. Great track. I think thinking about all the very talented musicians that played with Prince throughout his lifetime, he definitely gave Wendy and Lisa a little more leeway. Like, they were like the only people I think he ever saw as like almost like a peer. Not quite there, but like he allowed them to actually co-write songs and contribute. And he never really did that again. You know, he didn't do it before and he didn't do it afterwards, for the most part. Pretty much was the Prince show. But there was a period there, and it was complex because Prince is having this very passionate romantic relationship, and I believe they were engaged, with Wendy's twin sister. And they were identical sisters too. They look just like each other. So essentially, Prince is sleeping with a woman that looks just like Wendy, his guitarist. And then they broke up. And I don't think it's a coincidence that when they broke up, this is suddenly when Prince started to get weird with the Revolution. Yeah, it was probably weird for him. Like, here, I'm with this woman in the studio that looks just like this woman who I had this really stormy, passionate relationship with. Now it didn't work. So yeah, it had to be odd. But anyway, it's unfortunate because I do think Prince did a lot of his best music with Wendy and Lisa. And they were a package deal. You can't have Wendy without Lisa. But they're trying to work through the weirdness. And after Parade, they did go into the studio to start working on a follow-up, another Prince and the Revolution album. This would have been the fourth Prince and the Revolution album, the other two being Purple Rain and Around the World. in a day. So this was going to be the follow-up to Parade, and they were calling the album Dream Factory, or The Dream Factory. Let's see. Dream Factory, just Dream Factory. And this is in 1986, and they were very creative. And both Wendy and Lisa and Prince are really expanding musically, incorporating a lot of jazz. That's the big thing when you look at these track listings and you finally hear a lot of the unreleased tracks on the Sign of the Times Deluxe edition. You hear that this is a big jazz period for Prince. Prince is getting really into the jazz now. Like, he did the funk. He did some new wave, he's branching out, some pop rock, and then psychedelic stuff, and then he kind of got back into the funk, and then he was mixing the psychedelic stuff with the pop, with the rock, with the funk, and now he's throwing jazz into the equation. It's like, so much, but he can do it. Prince pulls it off, and Wendy and Lisa pulled it off, and the band sounds great, and there's a lot of cool songs, and they did this really long album. Well, no, the first one wasn't that long, actually. It was just 11 tracks. But this thing, there was 3 different versions of this album. They kept adding tracks. And, the second one was like a double album. And then there was another version, which was like a really long double album. So they just kept adding and adding. And I don't believe there was ever got to the mastering stage, or like they were printing out album covers and stuff. But they were it was clear that this was becoming an album. So Dream Factory has a lot of there's 3 different track listings for it, because at different stages. And a lot of these songs would end up eventually being on Sign of the Times. And in fact, the song Sign of the Times does pop up, I think, by towards the end of the sessions. And it's one of the songs. And also the song Crystal Ball. Both these songs would respectively become title tracks. So this was going to be a big double album by Prince and the Revolution. Felt like this was a good period for them to have a double album, after 3 successful albums. And they had the material. This is amazing stuff. I'm just going to say some of the songs you might know from it. From Sign of the Times that were included with the ballad of Dorothy Parker was on it, Starfish and Coffee, Strange Relationship, love that song, and eventually Sign of the Times popped up in there too, and a lot of stuff that would also end up being on Crystal Ball, and we'll talk about Crystal Ball in a minute. Before we get to Crystal Ball, there was another album. Okay, so essentially Prince breaks up the Revolution. After they finally get an album, we're ready to maybe release this, and it's a great album, Dream Factory. Great jazzy, pop, rock, funky masterpiece. Now that this deluxe Sign of the Times has come out, I now have all the tracks necessary to make all these unreleased Prince albums from the mid-'80s, and I've done that, utilizing Apple Music. I still call it iTunes technology. I have made the playlist and created these albums. And with this one, with Dream Factory, because there's so many different versions, I essentially just I did the first version and then expanded it with a bunch of bonus tracks. So it's I guess it's a Dream Factory Sessions is what I have in that playlist. And it's great. And, you listen to it and it's just this would have been better than Around the World in a Day. And I wouldn't say better than Parade or Purple Rain. I wouldn't say it's better than Sign of the Times, but it's close. It's in the ballpark, and definitely I think it's stronger than Around the World in a Day. And it's close to Parade, not quite there, but it's close. And it's great. It's like nothing Prince did in the 80s is bad, especially with the Revolution. It just would have been another great Prince and the Revolution album with more of a jazzier kind of take. So that's where I would say if Purple Rain leaned into the pop rock and Around the World leaned into the psychedelic pop, and Parade kind of mixed the psychedelic pop with funk, like getting a little more into the old school James Brown kind of funk stuff. This is kind of takes from Parade, but then adds more jazziness. Like there's a jazziness to it. And if you're familiar with songs like The Power Fantastic, it takes kind of that approach, and there's little Prince even has amazing little guitar solos and piano pieces, which ended up on the deluxe edition, Sign of the Times, and that was kind of it would have been it would actually been a really fitting and good ending for Prince and the Revolution. It would have been this is as far as we can go, getting kind of jazzier and sophisticated while still being kind of catchy and fun, and then he could have went off in another direction musically, which he did, and kind of brought it kind of back to its roots again. In a sense, I'd say, yeah, it's kind of progressive. And Wendy and Lisa kind of brought out that progressive side of him. And I feel like Dream Factory would have been the culmination of that progressive streak. And it would have been a fitting final album for Prince and the Revolution. But Prince was like, some shit went down. He didn't want to work with Wendy and Lisa anymore. And he decided to scrap the album. And do something else. And he went in a different direction. He used the one song that is always in every incarnation of this album that eventually becomes Sign of the Times is Strange Relationship. And it's such a great song. So I can understand why he would always hold on to that one. But so that's on this album that I'm about to talk about, which is Camille, the Camille album. Now, this is some crazy shit. So just stay with me here while I explain. Okay, so Prince disbands the Revolution and decides to shelf the Dream Factory album. This is still 86. We're still in the year 1986, all right? So all the shit's gone down in 1986. So Prince turned up the pitch on his vocals to make him sing higher. This is something that both Frank Zappa and George Clinton of George Clinton Funkadelic had done. And so he was probably inspired by both Zappa and definitely Funkadelic, that he was a big fan of George Clinton. So, where it makes Prince's voice even higher than it is naturally. Normally Prince has that falsetto, which is kind of high, but then he does this thing with the studio, so they bring him up a pitch, and as a result, he sounds even, I would say, more feminine, and Prince recognized this, and he decided that this voice was a different persona, a feminine persona, that he was a true Gemini, and that he had a masculine side and a feminine side, and this even is connected to the notorious Prince symbol. And what a lot of people don't know, I don't think a lot of people pay attention to this, is the symbol which he named himself in the mid-90s. It's a symbol was around for a long time. Like you see the symbol on the 1999 album cover. The symbol is also on his bike in Purple Rain. So if you look at the bike on Purple Rain, there's the male-female. It's the male-female signs together. It's like a cruder, earlier version of the symbol. It's not as fancy as the later version would get when it became like his official symbol. The symbol was there for a while. So Prince was always into this idea that he was kind of half man, half woman. And he was both the pimp and the hoe, and he decided to go full on freak and embrace it, and I don't mean freak in a pejorative way. I mean that in a funky, awesome kind of way. He decided to let his freak flag fly and say, you know what, I'm embracing just this feminine side, and I'm going to release this just down and dirty, just straight up funky, no revolution, except for that one song I'm going to use, Strange Relationship, and just do a real short, down and dirty kind of funky album. A little kind of like Dirty Mind, my favorite Prince record. So he's going to do that. And he knocks out just a couple tracks, 8 songs, could be an 8-song album. He used, like I said, Strange Relationship, but then he recorded a bunch of other new songs. Now, by himself, going back to his roots, his Dirty Mind roots. This is just Prince now, no Prince in the Revolution. And in the studio, using a drum machine and playing the rest of the instruments. And he does a Housequake is the first song he recorded, very James Brown kind of funky song. Shockadelica, one of the greatest Prince songs ever, which would become a very revered B-side, one of his most revered B-sides. And the band Ween covered it. They do a good cover, but you can't top the original. Shockadelica is a great rock and I guess it's kind of like a Funkadelic song, but with an 80s groove. It's like a rock meets funk. It's very rockin' and funky and dirty and great. Good Love, a song that would end up on the Crystal box set and was used in the movie Bright Lights, Big City. If I Was Your Girlfriend, one of Prince's masterpieces, one of his greatest songs. I will talk a little more about that when we get to Sign of the Times, because of course this was a song on Sign of the Times and one of the singles from the album. And then closing out the album was Rock Hard in a Funky Place, which would eventually end up on the Black Album. And this was a real down and dirty funky song. So that was the album. That was Camille. Prince was happy with it. And it was mastered. And they even printed up album covers. And it was ready to go. The album cover is I believe it was blank. And it didn't have Prince on it. And Prince didn't want it to be a Prince album. He wanted it to be called Camille. And he didn't want people to know it was Prince. He was going to keep that on DL. And this was going to come out as Camille. It was going to drop in 1986, Camille album. And he wanted to see if it would be popular even without his name. Of course, I'm sure Warner Brothers was thrilled with this. They were thrilled with this idea that the new Prince album, one of their biggest artists, was not going to have his name or picture on the album. So I'm sure they were not thrilled with this, but still they would go along with it. Kind of like there's a similar story with the Black Album a couple years later, where Camille, it's Camille again. Camille, Prince's mischievous feminine side, gets involved and gets him to do another down and dirty funky album called the Black Album. And Warner Brothers again, they pressed records, and it was mastered, and they pressed records, and it was going to come out. It was going to come out, and then Prince was like, no, it's evil, and he decided against it. I'm gonna do another video where I discuss the Black Album and Love Sexy, because those are the two albums. Those two albums are connected, and they're the yin and yang, and it's kind of like the sequel to what happened with Sign of the Times. So I will do a separate video in a few weeks discussing the Black Album and Love Sexy, and that's when we'll talk more about Camille's further adventures in Spooky Electric. You're going to find out about Spooky Electric. That guy's... he's a saucy one, that Spooky Electric. Makes Prince do bad things. But anyway, that's a tale for another time. Right now, Camille's ready to go out. It's going to be this high-pitched, funky Prince album, 86. It's going to be great. It kind of makes sense, too, after his success, his big hit from Parade, which, keep in mind, at this point, that was the last Prince album, because no one's heard this Dream Factory stuff. That was a shelved album. So coming off of the success of Kiss, which is a very minimalistic Prince song, and, Prince is singing in a falsetto, not it's a natural falsetto, but it kind of has the aesthetic of Camille. Kiss has the vibe and the funk, and it's down and dirty, and it's with a drum machine, and it's very minimalistic. So in a sense, Camille was going to be like a whole album of kisses. And that's awesome. And I got to say, this is the thing, like Dream Factory was an awesome album. Like it would have been an awesome album, but this is even more awesome. So even without the revolution, Prince is going to make an even more awesome album. And this would, Camille, like you look at this track listing, it's like, this is one of my favorite Prince albums. Boom. Down and dirty, it's how I like Prince. Like the Dirty Mind side meets Kiss, and he took the best song from Dream Factory, which is Strange Relationship, in my opinion. And Shockadelica, and oh man, this album would have been great. Release this goddamn album, Prince. But no, something happened, and Warner Brothers was probably thrilled about this, because even though these songs were really catchy, they were really weird and funky, and not quite as accessible as the other stuff of Prince and the Revolution. Would appeal to guys like me, but not your average mall chick. So when Prince pulled it, they probably went, "Whew, good. Let's do some pop rock, Prince. That's what that's what the kids will like. That's what the white girls will like." So Prince decided to scrap this. I think he thought Camille was evil. I don't know. He never trusted Camille. But anyway, so he scrapped Camille. And he's like, no, I can't do Camille. It's too funky. It's evil. And that's, which more or less he would do a few years later with the Black Album. So then he decides, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Even though I don't want to release Camille, there's some really dope tracks on it, so I'm not going to just throw them out in the trash. I'm going to take some of the best songs from Camille. And you know what? That Dream Factory album I was working on with Wendy and Lisa, that had some dope tracks too. So I'm gonna take the best tracks from that album, the Dream Factory, take the best tracks from Camille. You see what's going on here? He's gonna put them together. He's gonna put them together and make this really awesome triple album. And Prince being Prince, and Prince being, it's like still 1986, mind you, it's still 1 year. Prince can't help writing a handful of great new songs too. So he takes the best stuff, or a lot of great stuff from Dream Factory, a lot of the, like half of Camille, and a handful of some really good new songs he wrote, and he puts them all together. And now the track, this was a song that was on Dream Factory. He decides to call this whole album Crystal Ball. And Crystal Ball would be a song, which is like a 10-minute something epic, funky, jazzy masterpiece. And that was on it. And let me just read you the track listing, the proposed track listing for Crystal Ball. We had Rebirth of the Flesh, which was from Camille, Play in the Sunshine, Housequake, Bow to Dorothy Parker, It, Starfish and Coffee, Slow Love, Hot Thing, all from Sign of Times, and in that order. This is where things change a little bit when we get to side 3. Crystal Ball, If I Was Your Girlfriend, from Camille, Rock Hard in a Funky Place, also from Camille. The Ball, that was a new song that he wrote at that period. It would eventually become I Know on Love Sexy. Joy and Repetition. This is one of these new songs in 86 that he knocked out. A masterpiece. One of his greatest songs. It would eventually end up on Graffiti Bridge. Love that song. Strange Relationship. Like I said, the song that kept on hanging in there because it's awesome. I Can Never Take the Place of Your Man, which was on the Dream Factory. This version was on Dream Factory with Prince and Revolution, although there is an earlier version, as we know from the deluxe edition, that dates back to 1979, actually, and it had more of a new wave kind of sound. Shockadelica, Good Love, Forever in My Life, Sign of the Times, Sign O the Times, The Cross, It's Gonna Be a Beautiful Night, and The Door, so it pretty much ends the way Sign of the Times ends. This album, Crystal Ball, that track listing that I just told you, even though they lost some cool songs, a few cool songs from the last from Dream Factory, that triple album is an undeniable masterpiece, and I think it would have been Prince's greatest album. This is like, how many artists, most artists, like when they do a double album, and it's like, a lot of times you go like, oh, it would have been better if it was a single album. Prince is the only guy that releases a double album, and I listen to it, and I know the songs that aren't on it, that didn't make the cut, and I think to myself, that would have been better as a triple album. It's actually like, it would have been better as a triple album. There's something that's, some of the meat's taken out of it when you remove some of these songs, especially the Crystal Ball, which is kind of like this great, awesome centerpiece. But come on, Joy and Repetition. Like, let me just go through some of the songs that get left out of Sign of the Times. You lose Crystal Ball. You lose Joy and Repetition, one of his greatest songs. Shockadelica. You lose that song. And I guess those are the big 3 that I really miss. And it's just, I just wonder why, like, a few songs, some of his more conventional R&B songs, which I like, but like Slow Love and It's Gonna Be a Beautiful Night, like, I don't know why they made the cut, but Shockadelica and like Joy and Repetition didn't. That's all I gotta say. And so maybe there was even a double album version of this album that would have still been his best album. But I just think like 2 or 3 of the songs weren't the songs I would have picked. But, I didn't write the songs, Prince did, so I can just take a hike. It's still great. And we have all this music now, so it doesn't really matter. For years, though, when we didn't have all this music and I would hear bootlegs and stuff like that, I always thought to myself, like, gee, like, I just feel like Sign of the Times is just 2 or 3 choices away from being a much better album. But as it is, even the version that eventually came out is still a masterpiece and one of his best albums. I still say it's like my 4th or 5th favorite Prince album. So what happened is Prince gave this epic triple album to Warner Brothers. And Warner Brothers, by this point, I mean, after the Camille thing and breaking up Prince and the Revolution, I'm sure they groaned every time Prince was coming back at them with something. They were like, oh, what's this now? If only they knew it would only get worse years later. Years later, it'd be like the Black Album and, oh, I'm changing my name to a symbol. Oh, my God. I'm going to do a long erotic EP where I give Kim Basinger orgasms. Although that they probably liked. But yeah, I'm sure these Warner Brothers suits, they were probably like, oh, fuck, what's Prince throwing at us now? And he throws him this triple album. Hey, listen, my heart does not always go out to record execs, but I'm sure Prince gave them a lot of ulcers. There's probably a lot of stress. And they were like, and it turns out apparently at the time, like Under the Cherry Moon was considered a failure, even though I think it's an awesome movie. And I think Prince did a great job directing it. It was a little too funky for most people. So it wasn't the hit that Purple Rain was. And Parade, even though it did have a hit song, Kiss was a hit song, the album was not as successful as the past Prince albums. Because of this, Prince was perhaps, politically speaking, not at his best position to give them this triple album, especially after he had already flaked out on the last album, Camille. And now he's giving them a triple album. So these bewildered Warner Brothers execs were like, no, no, no. Listen, Prince, could it at least be a double album? Come on, that's still a lot. Prince never even had a double album before. So this would be his first double album. So they're like, hey, before the triple album, could we at least have a double album? And Prince, he gave in. He gave in. So yeah. So I guess he can compromise a little bit. He said fine. So he fine, and he took off a couple of his greatest songs ever and removed them. I mean, Crystal Ball was like over 10 minutes, so that right there, that helped out. So he took that off. Shockadelica would become a B-side, and Joy and Repetition he saved for a later album, and the same with Rock Hard in a Funky Place, and a couple other tracks would be unreleased for years. But still, more or less, Sign of the Times, the album that eventually did come out in 1987, was essentially a compressed, streamlined version of Crystal Ball. And it's a masterpiece. It's one of his best albums. How could it not be? How could an album that has all these songs that he was recording, starting with The Revolution, then by himself, all throughout 86, this is Prince's peak. This is Prince's peak of musicianship, songwriting. It's just Prince. It's peak Prince. This is peak Prince. So how could this album not be a masterpiece? And it is. Just because I say it's like this version that came out, the release version, is my fourth or fifth favorite Prince album, is by no means. You know what? I'm gonna go. Yeah, it's my fourth favorite. I used to say Love Sexy I liked a little bit better, but now I'm gonna push Love Sexy to my fifth place and say this is my fourth favorite Prince album. So that by no means is besmirching this album, because Prince is one of the greatest artists of all time and one of my favorite artists. So his fourth greatest album, nothing wrong with that. With a different song selection, a slightly different song selection, it would have been my favorite Prince album. So either way, masterpiece. So let's talk about Sign of the Times now, the official album that finally came out in 87 after all this musical odyssey. So you got the title track, Sign of the Times, one of the greatest Prince songs, a classic. It's got that kind of robotic, futuristic kind of synth drum sound in the beginning, and Prince is singing about AIDS and all kinds of stuff that's going on in the world, and gangs and relationships, and just he's mixing the political with the personal, and it's one of his. It's like kind of lyrically it reminds me kind of what Marvin Gaye was doing in the early 70s, but musically this is purely Prince and very modern and very mid 80s. He's got some really cool guitar work at the end. Great song live. That's great. Playing the Sunshine. Great rock and kind of pop rock song, but with a little tinge of gospel to it. Great song. Housequake, funky song, from the Camille albums. Ballad of Dorothy Parker, one of my favorite Prince songs. Kind of a smooth, funky song. Great lyrics, about this girl that wants him to take a bubble bath, but he keeps his pants on, because Prince is not the type of guy to jump in a bubble bath with any girl with his pants off. He'll keep his pants on, kind of survey the scene. And then when he feels comfortable and feels like he's not going to be taken advantage of, he will then remove the pants and chuck them and then get busy. It's just a cool little kind of techno song, kind of a techno funk dance song, Starfish and Coffee. Great little psychedelic pop song. You could hear the Wendy and Lisa involvement in this song. This dates back to Dream Factory. It has a kind of round the world in a day kind of vibe to it, kind of Beatle-esque. Hot Thing, Dead at 21. Hot Thing's a little funky number, little funky, dancey kind of number. Forever in My Life, a very moving kind of soulful soul song. You Got the Look, which was actually one of the last songs he recorded in this odyssey of studio recordings of 1986, and he brought in Sheena Easton, one of my first big crushes as a child, and he brought her in, and it's one of Prince's biggest hits, and they did a great duet, and he threw that on. If I Was Your Girlfriend, dating back to Camille. This was the track I said I was going to talk more about when we got here. One of my all-time favorite Prince songs, probably in my top 5. This is one of Prince's greatest songs. If I Was Your Girlfriend, and it makes sense that this was Camille singing, because it's getting all into his feminine side, and it's talking about, like, to a woman, about how he kind of wished he can take it to the next level. Like, he loves sleeping with her and being her boyfriend, but he kind of wished he could get even more involved with her. It's kind of creepy in a way, I guess. But yeah, hey, Prince, he's a sexy, creepy guy. He wants to also be her girlfriend. He wants to be everything to her. So and it's amazing. And it's kind of dark. It's a dark song, so it kind of makes sense. It's dark and funky and wistful and romantic, all at the same time. Like, how could something be dark and funky and catchy, wistful and romantic and sexy, like, all at the same time? And somehow he does it. It's like one of his all-time greatest songs. It's a classic. Hardcore Prince fans all love this song, as they should. It's an amazing song. And then it goes, this is actually my favorite section of the album. My 3 favorite songs are all back-to-back. If I Was Your Girlfriend, then Strange Relationship, the song that was on every incarnation of these 1986 into 87 Prince albums. And it's amazing because he never released it as a single, even though it was hanging in there. It was hanging in there, and you could tell that he thought it could be a single. And as we discovered from this new deluxe box set of Sign of the Times, there was a Shep Pettibone like club dance mix. Shep Pettibone was the guy, I think I'm pronouncing that right. He produced Madonna's Vogue and her Erotica album. So I feel like he wasn't doing a Strange Relationship club mix because they weren't thinking of it as a potential single. Obviously they were. So I think it should have been one of the singles. I don't know why it wasn't, because it's just a catchy song. It's a really catchy song. It's got that great thumping synth bass line and great hook. Love the lyrics, it's dysfunctional romance. It's great, and you hear Wendy and Lisa on it, and it's great. It's one of the best Prince songs ever, and I love it. And where it's at. It's almost like a trilogy. If I Was Your Girlfriend, Strange Relationship, and the next song, it's perfect because they all thematically kind of make sense. And then we get to I Can Never Take the Place of Your Man. Woo! One of the greatest Prince songs ever. Just a straight up pop rock masterpiece. Even the original version was great. I heard this 1979 If I Was Your Girlfriend, that was one of the songs that was leaked before this deluxe edition came out, and it's on the deluxe edition. It's great. It's like, I don't know why that didn't make Dirty Mind. That feels like it would have fit right perfectly on Dirty Mind. And that version's great. That 79 version is amazing. It's an amazing song. I might even like it better than the final version. It's hard to say. They're both amazing. There are some additional guitar hooks on the 87 version, well, recorded in 86, but released in 87 version, that does kind of take it up a notch. But I mean, both versions are great, and it's great that we have them now. But I Can Never Take the Place of Your Man, it's pop rock, but that with that Prince jiviness to it. And it's about how, like, he's telling this girl, like, that's coming on him, and hey, you got a guy, and he's better than me. He's better than me. So he's being like a straight up guy. He's doing like Casablanca type shit. He's saying, that dude is better than me. But he doesn't play guitar like Prince, I can tell you that. That's the ultimate Prince trilogy of songs right there, in my opinion. If I Was Your Girlfriend, Strange Relationship, and I Can Never Take the Place of Your Man. Perfect. Then we get to the final side of Sign of the Times, and that's The Cross. Great song, kind of like the Purple Rain of the album. It's a pop rock song with the guitar. It's very spiritual. Great song, love that. It's Gonna Be a Beautiful Night. Fun little funky song. Don't have a problem with it. I like it. I just thought some of the other songs that he left off were better. But it's a funky little tune. I mean, it could be like Kool and the Gang or Earth, Wind and Fire. There's nothing particularly, I mean, short of Prince's vocals, it could kind of be any R&B artist. But it's a funky tune. I like it. And then Adore, an amazing song, one of the later songs that he recorded in 86, and just a straight up R&B ballad. But this is a uniquely Prince R&B ballad, and it's sexy, and I guess you can hear a little of a Marvin Gaye influence, but Prince has his falsetto, and it's a sexy, beautiful, sensual song. A great way to end the album. I love Adore. I adore. Great way to end the album, and a great way to end this amazing period of Prince's music. Yeah, and I look at the singles that were released. It was Sign of the Times, If I Was a Girlfriend, You Got to Look, I Can Never Take the Place of Man. All makes sense. I would have just also released Strange Relationship. They should have had 5 singles. And then for a long time, and I had a bootleg. I had a bootleg in the like mid '90s. I had a boot when I first got really, really into Prince, and I had this funk band first in Philly, and then I moved to New York and started like another funk band. I was very into the funk, and I had a bootleg of the Black Album and also Crystal Ball, but it was just a single disc. It only had a few songs. But that's the first time I heard a lot of songs. First time I heard like a Wonderful Ass, Witness to the Prosecution, Movie Star, and so I heard a lot of those songs for the first time. Last Heart, which was a great song. So what happened is I think this was the late 90s, they released the Crystal Ball box set. Prince did. This was when he was still a symbol in the mid-90s, and he had left Warner Brothers, and he did the Emancipation album, which was a triple album. So now he's like throwing triple albums out at you. Now, Emancipation, that's like the opposite of Sign of the Times. Whereas Sign of the Times, because it was peak Prince, like that should have been a triple album because that was his peak as an artist and as a songwriter and musician, etc. But when he did Emancipation, even though that's a good album, I like it, but it would have been better as just 2 discs. Like, Prince was past his peak at that point. He was still doing good music. You know, I love the Gold Experience and Chaos and Disorder, but he sounds a little spent after those 2 great albums. And Emancipation sounds like it should have just been a double album. It would have been a really good double album, but he didn't quite, to me, the triple album doesn't quite make the cut. So to me, that was a little frustrating too. Like, you didn't do Crystal Ball back in the day, but now you're doing Emancipation. So he did that, and then he released a triple box set album called Crystal Ball, and at first I got very excited, and it is a great compilation. Problem with Crystal Ball is it's not really Crystal Ball. It's not like all the songs from that period. It's not just 86 songs, which he did have 3 albums worth of material, if not 4 or 5 albums worth of material. In Crystal Ball, he mixed in a lot of 90s stuff. There's a lot of new Power Generation era stuff, and so it's not even put together chronologically. It's all kind of mixed together. And it's a great listen. It's all great music. But when listening to it, you just can't help like wishing the 90s stuff was on something else and that he just did a full-fledged like Crystal Ball Dream Factory Sessions album. Like, that's what I really wanted to hear. So I remember being kind of disappointed that that's the way he presented it. But still, it was like that was the first time I heard the song Crystal Ball in all its glory and Dream Factory. And I finally got like a remastered version of like Movie Star. So I couldn't complain. I was still getting a lot of great music. And that was for a while. We had Sign of the Times and we had Crystal Ball, and those were that's what represented Prince's 1986 output. But then, just this year, 2020, goddamn horrible year, but at least we got some good music from a few of my favorite artists, and that's when this Sign of the Times Deluxe Edition came out. And not only did they do a great remaster of the album, they also have a great live album, and this was a great tour. It did a lot of songs for Sign of the Times, a few classics. There was also a movie that came out at that time, Sign of the Times concert movie, and I used to have the VHS of that when I was younger, and then eventually a DVD. And that it's one of Prince's greatest concerts. It's awesome. And this concert disc, this live album that's included with this album, it's amazing. It's amazing. Great version of Girls and Boys, one of my favorite songs from Parade. Everything's great. It's a really great live album, one of Prince's best live albums. And that, it's amazing that you got it. And the sound quality is great, and the performances are great. It's great. In addition to that live album and the remastered Sign of the Times, we get The Vault, which is 3 discs worth of unreleased tracks. And now we've got everything. If you put this together with the Sign of the Times, with the B-sides that came out back in the early 90s with his first greatest hits package, the hits 1 and 2, Crystal Ball, the Crystal Ball box set of the late 90s, and then add these songs, you got everything now. Now I could recreate all those amazing albums, all these lost albums from 1986, all these unreleased albums from 86, because now we got it all. And it's all great stuff. Let me just go through some of the songs from this. You got that great 79 version of I Can Never Take the Place of Your Man. That's a great song. You got earlier versions of Strange Relationship. You got Witness for the Prosecution. Great tune. Great to hear a nice, clean, mastered version of that, because that was a song I had back on my old bootleg. And that's great. You got Love and Sex, a song I never heard of before. Never even heard of this song before. And never heard it before. Love and Sex is great, kind of funk rocker. I love it. Really cool, down and dirty song. Sounds like could have been maybe from the Camille period. I don't know exactly, but it sounds like That would have been my guess, but it would have fit on that album. But great song. Love that song. Place in Heaven's a beautiful song, which you hear a Prince version of it, a Lisa lead vocal version of it, and a version of Lisa's version backwards. Colors is a beautiful little instrumental. You get a 7-inch version of Crystal Ball. So I guess was there a time when they thought that might be a single before he decided to scrap it all together? I don't know. I can hear it. It's a funky song, one of his best. Great. Big Tall Wall. Really like that song. That's a fun pop rocker from the Dream Factory sessions. In a Large Room with No Light, also from the Dream Factory sessions. Beautiful jazzy song. Really unique. Something that only Prince would do when he was with Wendy and Lisa. Very jazzy. I like that song a lot. Train's a cool tune. Looking at all this. It's all great stuff. You got the Rebirth of the Flesh. Rebirth of the Flesh was originally going to be the opening for Camille and also the opening for Crystal Ball, the original Crystal Ball from '86, the triple album. So we finally get to hear that, and that's a funky tune. And that amazing live album, live in Utrecht. Is that right? Is that how you pronounce it? Utrecht? And that's all great. So if you have a lot of money and you love Prince, I definitely recommend the Prince Uber Super Purple Super Deluxe Sign of the Times edition. It's amazing. This is all amazing music. I would say if I take one takeaway from the big revelation from the vaults is that it sounds like the side that Prince most was holding back on was his jazz side. That he was really getting into actually with the Revolution, with Dream Factory, with the two white girls, Wendy and Lisa. So that's interesting. So I feel like that's the side. You hear a lot of jazziness, and that's ultimately what didn't make the cut eventually on Sign of the Times. And how there's even one song which I didn't mention, which I should mention, is Can I Play With You? Which features Miles Davis. Miles Davis actually plays on this track. He plays trumpet. And that just shows you that, yeah, he was really getting into jazz. And you hear it more on the live album. And I remember this even on the live Sign of the Times movie. Like, there would be a lot of little jazzy interludes. And he had horns up there and stuff. And that's that's the real big revelation, is that Prince had this jazz side. It wasn't just funk, it wasn't just rock, it wasn't just pop. He was also really into jazz, and his father was a jazz musician. And so this was a big part of who he was as well. And that's one great thing about hearing all this Prince stuff that's now being released. It's sad, the circumstances of why it's being released, but still, Prince's music lives on. And to hear this other jazzy side of Prince, to just know the extent of how much of a genius he was, it's amazing stuff. It's a gift. It's a gift to have these songs. It's a gift to be able to now go back on my iTunes and make a Camille album, make the Dream Factory sessions, and make a Crystal Ball, original '86 version of Crystal Ball, which I have, and they're all amazing. And I think Camille and the '86 Crystal Ball are two of his greatest albums ever. And now we got it all. We got everything. So it's amazing. If you're a Prince fan, definitely get this stuff. If you got the money, buy it. If you don't, get it some other way, because it's worth it. I love Prince. I love this period. '86. Peak Prince, and that's all I gotta say. Cheers.